I'm not the kind of person who looks for trouble at work. I like clean spreadsheets, quiet routines, and going home at a reasonable hour. So when my company's VP of Finance leaned into my doorway and said, "We need you on this. Keep it tight. Keep it quiet," my first thought wasn't scandal. It was damage control. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a conference room while senior leadership told the whole department, straight-faced, that the project had failed and the fund was gone, like the money had evaporated, and they were looking right past the executives who approved every spend and directly at the team who did the work. The part that still makes my stomach tighten is this. They didn't know the audit was already done. I work in internal audit, not the Hollywood kind. No trench coat, no surprise raids. My job is mostly boring on purpose. Controls, approvals, documentation trails. The kind of work that keeps a company from bleeding out slowly because someone got sloppy or greedy or both. The project was called Orion, officially a modernization initiative for a core product line, unofficially the pet project of our COO, who liked to talk about moving fast like that phrase was a shield against basic accounting. Orion had been running for a year and a half, burning money like a space heater in July, and still couldn't produce a stable prototype. Engineering blamed shifting requirements. Product blamed vendor delays. Leadership blamed market conditions, which is what people say when they don't want to blame themselves. I got pulled in after a routine monthly variance report lit up like a Christmas tree. The burn rate didn't just rise, it spiked in a way that didn't match the staffing plan. Same month, 2 contractors I'd never heard of suddenly showed up on the vendor list. Both flagged as strategic consulting, both under thresholds that avoided board-level sign-off, not illegal, just designed. My director framed it like a favor. "This is a quick look," she said, sliding a slim folder across my desk. "We just need to document what happened and close it out clean." Close it out clean is corporate code. It means don't widen the blast radius. I started where I always start. The approvals, purchase orders, statements of work, invoice matching. I expected to find the usual mess. Late paperwork, sloppy descriptions, someone charging the wrong cost center. What I found was better. And by better, I mean worse in a way that was deliberate. Invoices split into neat little pieces. $24,800 here, $24,600 there. Always just under the threshold that would kick them up to the CFO's approval queue. Change orders filed as scope clarification with no attached scope. Payments routed through a vendor we'd used before, but the line items were different now. Research facilitation, stakeholder alignment, expedite fees, words that sound important and mean nothing. I pulled the email approvals. The real approvals, not the check-the-box ones in the system. That's when it stopped feeling like a messy project and started feeling like a script. One thread had a senior director asking if a vendor could repackage some expenses to keep them inside the Orion bucket. Another had someone in procurement pushing back, politely, cautiously, about missing deliverables. The response was a one-liner from an executive assistant copying the CO, "Proceed. We'll true up later." Nobody trues up later. They just move on and hope the quarter ends before anyone asks. By day 3, I stopped taking my lunch at my desk. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I didn't want anyone watching my screen. People notice when audit starts asking questions. People get jumpy, and jumpy people make mistakes, deleting emails, cleaning folders, suddenly forgetting passwords, mistakes that don't help them. I requested the vendor master file and payment history through our normal channels, but I also saved snapshots of what I was seeing. Timestamps, report extracts, the little details people forget exist. I didn't do it because I was paranoid. I did it because I've seen this pattern before. The moment someone realizes you're not looking at a problem but a person, the story starts changing. Around then, my access to the Orion shared drive went read-only. No announcement, no email, just a silent change that made my cursor turn into a useless little icon every time I tried to open a folder. I pinged IT. They told me, must be a permissions update, put in a ticket. I put in a ticket. It sat there like a dead fish. That afternoon, my manager asked me to sync in a huddle room. Not my director, my manager. The one who usually avoided anything uncomfortable by scheduling it for next week. He shut the door, didn't sit, and said, "You're digging pretty deep for a closeout review." "I'm following the money," I said. He didn't smile. "The guidance is to focus on process improvements, not conclusions." That was another phrase. Not conclusions. In other words, don't write anything that forces us to do something. I nodded like I understood. I even said, "Got it." Because if you want to keep seeing the truth, you don't announce that you found it. The next morning, there was a calendar invite on everyone's schedule. Orion status update, all hands, mandatory, senior leadership, 30 minutes. The invite came from the COO's office, and the moment I saw it, I understood exactly what was about to happen. They weren't calling an all hands to admit they'd mismanaged a project. They were calling it to control the narrative before someone else did. I walked into that conference room early and sat near the back, where I could see the door and the faces. People filed in with coffee and cautious small talk, like they could sense a storm but didn't want to name it. The COO stood near the screen with that calm, practiced expression executives wear when they're about to say something ugly in polite language. Then the CFO walked in last, eyes scanning the room like he was counting liabilities. The COO didn't waste time. He clicked to a slide with a single sentence in big font. Orion program closeout. And he said, "We need to talk about why the fund is gone." The COO spoke the way people do when they've already decided who's responsible. He said the market shifted. He said vendors overpromised. He said the team did their best under pressure. Then he paused, looked down the table, and said, "Unfortunately, the fund allocated to Orion is now fully exhausted. There's nothing left to recover." No mention of approvals. No mention of who signed what. Just a soft implication hanging in the air. This was an execution failure. People shifted in their seats. A few heads turned, not toward the executives, but toward the project managers, the leads, the analysts, toward us. That's how it works. You don't accuse anyone directly. You let gravity do the work. The CFO took over with slides, burn rate graphs, red bars climbing neatly into the corner like a warning label. No one read in time. "We'll be conducting a lessons learned exercise," he said, "and we'll need Audit to help us document where controls broke down." That was my cue. I raised my hand, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. "For clarity," I said, keeping my voice flat, "are we saying the funds are missing or that they were spent?" The room went quiet in that very specific way where no one wants to be the next person to speak. The CFO smiled, tight. "They were spent without the expected outcome. So the funds are accounted for," I said, "just not recoverable." The COO cut in. "The point is, the project failed." That sentence landed like a door slamming. End of discussion. They wrapped it up quickly after that. Action items. Next steps. HR language about supporting affected teams. As people stood to leave, no one made eye contact. It felt like a verdict had been read, even if no names were spoken. I didn't stay behind. I didn't confront anyone in the hallway. I went back to my desk and found two things waiting for me. First, my access to the finance approval archive was gone completely. Not read-only, gone. Second, an email from my director. Subject line, "Let's align." Meeting in 30 minutes. I closed the email and opened my local folder, the one not on the network, the one with the exports, the timestamps, the approval chains I'd already pulled. Everything was still there, quiet, untouched. That was when I realized this wasn't about fixing a problem. It was about finishing a story before someone else could tell it. My director didn't waste time either. "Leadership feels like the audit focus needs to narrow," she said carefully. "They're concerned about scope creep." I was assigned to trace spend variance, I replied. That's what I did. Yes, but intent matters, she said. We don't want to imply misconduct where there may have just been urgency. Urgency. Another word that absolves people who had time to think. She leaned forward. They want a clean close-out memo. Process gaps. Recommendations. No individual attribution. I nodded, took notes, said all the right things. If you push back too early, they stop talking to you. After the meeting, I noticed the tone change around me. Conversation stopped when I walked by. A project manager I'd worked with for years wouldn't meet my eyes. Someone joked, too loudly, that Audit was out for blood. By the end of the day, an HR rep I'd never spoken to before asked if I had capacity concerns and offered to rebalance my workload. That night at home, I opened my laptop again. I reread the emails, slowly this time, not looking for numbers, looking for language. Who said proceed? Who said we'll fix it later? Who was always copied but never replied, and who replied without being asked. I built the timeline properly. First approval. First split invoice. First deviation from scope. The moment procurement flagged it. The moment someone overrode them. It wasn't chaos. It was a straight line. And then there was the consulting vendor. I hadn't focused on them enough before. Same firm name, different LLCs. One registered out of state. Same mailing address. Different bank accounts. Legal, but convenient. I checked the vendor onboarding notes. Approved in 48 hours. Sponsor listed as the COO's office. That was when I understood something else. They weren't just trying to bury the past. They were trying to make sure nothing else surfaced. The next morning, my calendar access flickered. Meetings disappeared, then reappeared. It finally closed my ticket with a generic note. Permissions aligned per leadership request. Per leadership request. I didn't respond. Instead, I finished the audit. Not the version they wanted. The real one. I followed policy to the letter. Completed the findings matrix. Attached evidence. Cross-referenced approvals. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't editorialize. I let the documents speak because documents don't get emotional, and they don't back down. When I hit final, the system timestamped it automatically, and that was the moment everything changed. Because I didn't send it to my director, I sent it where finalized audits are supposed to go when there's potential exposure. Legal. Compliance. And, by routine scheduling already on the calendar, the external auditors who were due for their quarterly walkthrough. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. The reaction didn't come right away. That's the thing people get wrong. They expect alarms, angry calls, someone bursting into a room. What actually came first was silence. The careful, professional kind that means something's gone wrong and no one wants to be the first to acknowledge it. That afternoon passed without incident. No emails, no messages. I went home at my usual time, cooked dinner, and didn't open my laptop again. If you move too fast after a decision like that, you look nervous. I wasn't nervous. I was finished. The next morning, the tone shifted. I had 3 new calendar invites before 9 a.m. One from legal, one from compliance, one labeled audit walkthrough, updated scope, sent by the external audit firm. All routine titles, none routine in timing. By 9:30, my director messaged me, "Can you stop by?" No subject, no emoji. That alone told me everything. Her office door was already closed when I arrived. She didn't offer a seat. "Why didn't you route the report through me?" she asked. "I finalized it per policy," I said. "Potential exposure requires legal and compliance distribution." Her jaw tightened. Leadership feels blindsided. "They changed my access mid-review," I replied. "I documented it." That was the moment she understood she wasn't in control of this anymore. You can see it when someone realizes the ladder they're standing on isn't leaning against the wall they thought it was. By noon, the COO's assistant emailed asking for a quick sync. I declined politely and copied legal. 5 minutes later, legal replied all, "We'll coordinate centrally." That email landed like a drop plate. The external auditors came in the next day. Not physically, remote session, cameras on, everything recorded. They asked for a walkthrough of Orion spend controls. I shared my screen and walked them through the timeline exactly as written. No commentary, no emphasis, just facts in order. When they asked why certain approvals bypassed thresholds, I pointed to the emails. When they asked why vendor scopes changed without deliverables, I pointed to the change orders. When they asked who sponsored the vendor onboarding, I read the field out loud. No one interrupted me. Halfway through, the COO joined the call, late, camera off. He didn't say a word. After the session ended, my inbox filled up fast. Requests for clarification, requests for documentation I'd already attached. Requests framed as favors. Just help us understand the context. Context is another word people use when they want to soften a paper trail. I didn't add context. I referenced sections. That afternoon, procurement forwarded an internal note they'd been asked to draft, Amos, a retroactive justification for the vendor splits. It wasn't malicious. It was desperate. They were being told to fix something that couldn't be fixed without creating a bigger problem. I replied to procurement and looped legal again. Please don't alter historical records. Refer to audit findings. 30 minutes later, the note was withdrawn. By the end of the week, the building felt different. Meetings got quieter. People spoke carefully, like the walls had ears. Someone from HR quietly canceled a performance alignment meeting they'd scheduled with a project manager. Another vendor invoice was suddenly on hold pending review. The first real consequence came on Friday, and all hands went out, shorter than the last one. Same room, different energy. The CFO spoke this time. He didn't mention Orion directly. He talked about control enhancements and vendor governance. Then he said, effective immediately, certain leaders will be stepping back from operational duties during an internal review. No names, but everyone knew. The COO didn't attend. Later that day, I saw him leaving the building with a folder under his arm and legal walking beside him. Not close, not friendly, just aligned. No raised voices, no scene. That's how it actually happens when things are real. Over the next 2 weeks, contracts were terminated. One vendor stopped answering calls. Another sent a long email about misunderstandings and industry norms. Finance initiated clawback discussions. Compliance updated policies that had existed all along, but were suddenly being enforced. No one apologized to the Orion team. They didn't have to. The narrative had already shifted. Quietly, cleanly, without admitting the earlier version had been a lie. Someone asked me in the hallway if I'd planned it, if I'd known it would go this far. I told them the truth. I planned to finish my job. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. I was just waiting for the last part to land. The review didn't end with an announcement. It never does. There was no email saying we were wrong, no apology tour, no dramatic reversal, just a series of quiet, irreversible changes that told you exactly how serious it had become. First, the COO's calendar went dark. No meetings, no standing check-ins. His name stayed on documents for a while, then slowly disappeared. Someone else started covering his responsibilities. Temporary, they said. Everyone understood what that meant. Then the consulting vendor vanished from the system. Their profile was marked inactive. Payments frozen, access revoked. Finance called it a pause. Legal called it preservation. I called it overdue. A week later, compliance circulated a memo about revised approval thresholds for consulting spend. The policy was almost identical to the old one. Same rules, same language, just enforced now with teeth. It was their way of saying this wasn't a one-off. It was a correction. No one asked me to revise my report. No one tried to soften it anymore. The findings stood as written. I stayed out of the spotlight. That part matters. When things fall apart above you, the safest place is stillness. I showed up, did my work, answered questions with references instead of opinions, let other people talk themselves into knots. About a month later, my director asked me to grab coffee. Not a meeting room, not her office. Neutral ground. She didn't dance around it. "They're offering you a promotion," she said. Expanded scope. More visibility. I already knew. The signal had been there for weeks. Executives suddenly polite. People asking my opinion who never had before. "Why now?" I asked. She hesitated. "Because you handled it correctly." That was her word. Not bravely, not heroically, correctly. I thanked her and said I needed time. That night I thought about Orion, about the team that got blamed first, about how close the company came to writing a lie into its own history and calling it strategy, and about how, even when the truth wins, it leaves a residue. A few days later, I declined the promotion. Not dramatically, not with a speech. I just said I'd decided to leave. I gave notice. Clean handoff. Documentation complete. No burned bridges. People were surprised, but not shocked. Once you see how power really moves, it's hard to unsee it. On my last day, I cleared my desk and walked out like I had every other afternoon. No escort, no farewell email blast, just a quiet exit. A few months after that, I ran into the former COO by accident. Coffee shop near my new office. He was standing in line, older somehow, like the posture had finally caught up with the pressure. When he turned and saw me, there was a flicker of recognition and something else. Not anger, awareness. He nodded. I nodded back. Neither of us said a word. There was nothing left to say. He knew I hadn't made a mistake. I knew he'd signed his own name to every decision that mattered. I ordered my coffee and left before him. That's the thing people misunderstand about accountability. It doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just the slow removal of certainty. The knowledge that the story you tried to sell didn't hold, and that someone saw it clearly enough and early enough to stop it. They told everyone the fund was gone. They said the project failed. What they never said out loud was that the audit had already been finished, and it said exactly what it needed to say.